The morning sun cast long shadows across the ruins of what was once New York City. Massive metal spires twisted toward the sky like the bones of some ancient beast, their surfaces scarred by 1,000 years of neglect. Between the broken towers, small camps of humans huddled around fires, their faces weathered by hardship and marked by a quiet determination that their alien overlords had never quite managed to crush. Tom kicked at a piece of rubble as he made his way through the settlement. At 25, he had never known Earth before the occupation, but the stories lived in his blood like a fever dream. His grandfather used to whisper tales of flying machines that belonged to humans, of cities that touched the clouds, of a time when mankind reached for the stars instead of cowering beneath them. Another ship landed last night, his friend Jake called out from across the camp. Jake was older, maybe 30, with scars across his arms from years of forced labor in the mining colonies. 3 more transports. They're taking the young ones again. Tom's jaw tightened. The Keth Empire had ruled Earth for a millennium, treating humans like cattle to be herded from one work site to another. The blue-skinned aliens with their 4 arms and cold black eyes had crushed human civilization in a matter of months, back when Earth still had weapons and armies and hope. Now, the survivors lived in scattered groups, invisible to their masters, except when labor was needed. How? Many this time, Tom asked. 50 from the eastern camps, maybe 60 from the coast settlements. Jake spat into the dirt. They're building something big out there, something that needs a lot of hands. The Keth had always been builders. Their empire stretched across half the galaxy, a network of Unhav, slave worlds and resource colonies that fed their endless hunger for expansion. Earth was just another dot on their maps, notable only for the surprising stubbornness of its native population. Most species submitted within a generation. Humans had been fighting back in small and mostly pointless ways for 10 centuries. Tom watched a group of children playing with sticks in the dirt, imagining battles they would never fight, flying ships they would never pilot. Their laughter echoed strangely in the ruins, a sound of life persisting where it should not have existed. There's something else, Jake said, lowering his voice. He glanced around to make sure no Keth drones were nearby. The small flying machines monitored the camps constantly, though they rarely interfered unless humans showed signs of organizing. Ben found something in the deep ruins yesterday. Something old. Tom followed Jake through a maze of collapsed buildings to where Ben waited by a hole in the ground. Ben was the oldest human in their camp, maybe 70, with white hair and hands that shook when he thought no one was looking. But his mind was sharp, and he remembered things that others had forgotten. Show him, Jake whispered. Ben pulled a small metal object from his coat. It was no bigger than Tom's fist, smooth and silver, with strange markings carved into its surface. The moment Tom touched it, the device grew warm in his hands. It's human, Ben said quietly. Old human tech from before the invasion. Tom turned the object over in his palms. The markings seemed to shift and dance in the light, forming patterns that almost looked like writing. What does it do? I don't know yet, Ben admitted, but it responded to my touch. It's been dead for 1,000 years, and now it's waking up. He paused, his eyes bright with something Tom had never seen there before. Hope. There might be others. Hidden caches. Old military sites that the Keth never found. Above them, a Keth patrol ship passed overhead, its shadow falling across the camp like a dark promise. The humans instinctively ducked lower, a reflex bred into them by generations of oppression. But Tom kept his eyes on the alien craft, and for the first time in his life, he felt something other than fear when he looked at it. He felt anger. If there's more technology out there, Tom said slowly, if there are things they missed, then maybe it's time to stop hiding, Ben finished. Maybe it's time to remember what we used to be. The device pulsed once in Tom's hands, as if agreeing, and somewhere in the depths of the ruined city, other long-dormant systems began to stir. The Keth Empire had ruled the galaxy for millennia, crushing every species that dared to resist them. But they had made one critical error. They had let humanity survive. Awakening the past 3 weeks had passed since Ben found the device, and everything had changed. Tom stood in what used to be a subway tunnel, now converted into a hidden workshop where a dozen humans worked by. The light of salvaged lamps. The silver device sat on a makeshift table, connected to other pieces of ancient technology that Ben had somehow coaxed back to life. "It's a key," Ben explained to the gathered group, his voice echoing off the tunnel. "Walls. A master key to something called the Prometheus Network." He touched the device gently, and symbols flickered across its surface. Our ancestors built backup systems, hidden bunkers, automated factories, all waiting for someone to wake them up. Lisa, a former engineer who had spent 15 years building Keth mining equipment, leaned forward. "You're saying there's a whole network of human technology that's been sleeping for 1,000 years? "Not sleeping," Ben corrected. "Waiting. Learning. The network has been monitoring everything. It knows where every Keth ship lands, every patrol route, every weakness in their system." Tom felt his heart racing. Around him, he could see the same desperate hope in every face. These weren't soldiers or warriors. They were survivors, broken by generations of servitude. But something was stirring in them, something that had been buried but never truly died. The device pulsed, and suddenly the tunnel filled with light. Holographic displays materialized in the air, showing star maps, ship designs, and data streams that moved too fast to follow. When the light faded, everyone was staring at a three-dimensional image of Earth as it was 1,000 years ago. Cities covered the continents like jewels. Massive space stations orbited the planet. Ships moved between the stars like silver fish swimming through an ocean of darkness. It was beautiful and terrible and completely impossible to believe. "This is what we were," Ben said quietly. "This is what they took from us." The image shifted, showing the invasion. Keth battle fleets darkening the sky, human cities burning. The proud ships of Earth's fleet scattered like leaves in a storm. But even as the planet fell, the hologram showed something else. Hidden facilities going underground. Ships fleeing to the outer system. A plan being executed even as civilization collapsed. "They didn't destroy everything," Tom breathed. "Some of it survived. The question is whether we can reach it," Lisa said. "These bunkers, this network, how do we access it without the Keth noticing?" Ben smiled for the first time since Tom had known him. "That's the beautiful part. The network has been watching the Keth for 1,000 years. It knows how to hide from them." He gestured to the device. "This key doesn't just unlock doors. It unlocks possibilities." Over the following days, the device led them to hidden caches throughout the ruined city. Ancient weapons that still held their charge. Medical supplies that could heal wounds in minutes instead of weeks. Communication devices that could reach other human settlements across the globe without the Keth detecting them. But the most important discovery came when Tom activated a dormant computer terminal in what had once been a government building. The screen flickered to life, showing a face that looked almost human, except for the slight blue tint to the skin and the extra pair of eyes. "I am Marcus," the face said, its voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I was human once, before the enhancement protocols. Before we learned to adapt," the image smiled sadly. "If you're seeing this message, then the worst has happened. Earth has fallen, but do not despair. This is not the end of our story." Tom stared at the screen, transfixed. Enhancement protocols? During the final years before the invasion, Some humans volunteered for experimental procedures, Marcus continued. Genetic modifications, cybernetic implants, neural interfaces. That would let them survive in space for extended periods. We called them the deep fleet ships that could hide in the dark between stars, waiting for the right moment to return. The implications hit Tom like a physical blow. There are humans out there, enhanced humans who've been hiding for 1,000 years. The network has been sending signals, Ben realized, studying the data streaming across other displays. Calling them home. The key wasn't just meant to unlock bunkers on Earth. It was meant to summon the fleet. As if responding to his words, the device grew warm in Tom's hands. Somewhere in the darkness beyond Earth's atmosphere, ancient sensors detected the signal. Ships that had drifted silent and cold for centuries began to power up their engines. The descendants of humanity's greatest heroes turned their prows toward home. The Keth Empire was about to learn that some species don't stay conquered forever. High above Earth's scarred surface, Keth Commander Voss stood on the bridge of his dreadnought, reviewing mining reports with the casual indifference of someone who had overseen this particular slave world for 30 years. The humans were productive. Enough, though, they required constant supervision. Unlike other conquered species, they had an annoying tendency to organize themselves into small rebellions that had to be crushed regularly. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're detecting unusual energy readings from the planet's surface." Voss barely looked up from his reports. Human technology was primitive scrap metal, barely capable of powering their cooking fires. Probably salvaged power cells from the old ruins. Ignore it. But in the depths of space, something was stirring that Commander Voss had never imagined. The deep fleet had been waiting in the dark between stars for 1,000 years. Their crews, sustained by advanced life support systems and driven by a single purpose, to ensure humanity's survival. The signal from Earth's surface was the moment they had prepared for across 50 generations. Captain Hayes floated in the command center of the stealth ship Defiance, her body more machine than flesh, after centuries of enhancement procedures. Her eyes replaced long ago with cybernetic implants, processed data streams that would have overwhelmed an unmodified human brain. Around her, a crew of 30 worked at stations designed for beings who no longer needed to breathe normal air or eat regular food. "Signal confirmed," reported Lieutenant Shun, his voice carrying harmonics that no baseline human throat could. "Produce. The Prometheus key has been activated. The resistance is ready." Hayes allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Her great-grandmother had been aboard one of the last ships to escape Earth's fall. 4 generations had lived and died in the cold between stars, waiting for this day. Signal the fleet. All ships converge on Earth. Execute Protocol Omega. Across the solar system, ships that had hidden in asteroid fields and behind the moons of gas giants began to move. They were unlike anything the Kef had ever encountered, sleek vessels that seemed to bend light around themselves, powered by fusion reactors that ran silent and cold. Their hulls were embedded with technology that made them invisible to conventional sensors. But more importantly, their crews were no longer entirely human. On Earth, Tom felt the device in his hands grow hot as signals cascaded through the Prometheus network. In hidden bunkers across the planet, automated systems that had slept for a millennium began to wake up. Manufacturing plants deep underground started producing weapons, ammunition, and equipment at a rate that would have impressed even the Keth Empire. "Something's happening," Jake said, pointing to the sky. The Keth patrol ships that usually moved in lazy circles above the city were suddenly accelerating, forming defensive formations. They looked nervous. Ben was studying readouts on one of the ancient displays. "The network is feeding us real-time intelligence on their fleet positions. Every ship, every weapon, every weakness." He looked up at Tom with amazement. We're not fighting blind anymore. The first sign that the Keth had noticed something was wrong came when their dreadnoughts, long-range sensors, detected energy signatures approaching from the outer system. Commander Voss frowned as his tactical officer reported multiple contacts, moving at impossible speeds. Identification? Voss demanded. Unknown, sir. The signatures don't match any known ship design in our database. They're moving in formation, but, sir, they're not showing up on visual scanners. Voss felt the first cold touch of uncertainty. In 30 years of garrison duty, nothing had ever approached Earth without his permission. Battle stations. Signal. The home fleet for reinforcements. But the message never reached Keth space. The moment Voss's communications array began transmitting, it was intercepted by the Deep Fleet's electronic warfare systems and quietly suppressed. To the rest of the Keth Empire, Earth remained a quiet backwater world with no problems worth. Mentioning Tom watched from the tunnel as the sky above the city began to change. The Keth ships were moving faster now, their running lights creating streams of blue and red against the darkness. But there was something else, shadows that moved. Between the stars, visible only as brief distortions in the light. They're here, Ben whispered, and Tom could hear tears in the old man's voice. After 1,000 years, they've come home. The first shots of the war were fired not by the returning fleet, but by the bunkers themselves. Ancient weapon systems, hidden beneath the ruins of human cities, suddenly powered up and began targeting the Keth ships above. Beams of coherent energy lanced skyward, catching the alien vessels completely by surprise. The liberation of Earth had begun. Asterisk. The first Keth dreadnought died in less than 30 seconds. Commander Voss had barely enough time to register the energy. Beams rising from Earth's surface before his ship's shields collapsed under the focused fire of weapons that weren't supposed to exist. The massive vessel, which had controlled Earth's orbital space for 3 decades, broke apart in a cascade of explosions that lit up the night. Sky like a second sun. Tom watched from the tunnel entrance as debris rained down across the ruined city, pieces of alien technology that had seemed invincible just moments before. Around him, humans were emerging from their hiding places, staring up at the sky with expressions of wonder and disbelief. The bunker network is fully online, Ben reported from his position at the control station. 47 weapon platforms across 6 continents. The Keth fleet is in complete disarray. But the real shock came when the Deep Fleet finally revealed itself. Ships materialized out of nothing as their stealth systems disengaged, appearing around Earth like ghosts becoming solid. They were beautiful and terrible, sleek vessels that moved with an organic grace that spoke of technology far beyond what humanity had possessed during the invasion. Their hulls seemed to shift and flow, adapting to incoming fire in ways that conventional armor never could. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge of the Defiance as her ship descended through Earth's atmosphere for the first time in 1,000 years. Through her enhanced senses, she could feel every system on her vessel, every weapon charging, every crew member's elevated heartbeat. The modifications that had kept her people alive in deep space had turned them into something more than human. But they had never forgotten what they were fighting for. Multiple Keth ships attempting to flee the system, reported her tactical officer. Orders? Hayes's smile was sharp as a blade. Let them try. Signal the outer perimeter. Nothing leaves Earth space alive. The Keth had ruled through overwhelming force for 1,000 years, crushing any resistance before it could organize. But they had never faced anything like the Deep Fleet. These ships moved like living things, coordinating their attacks through quantum-entangled communication networks. That made them react as a single organism. When Keth battle cruisers tried to focus fire on individual targets, the human ships would phase shift their positions, appearing to occupy multiple locations simultaneously. On the ground, the Prometheus network was awakening systems that had been hidden across the planet. Automated factories deep beneath the surface began producing weapons and equipment, sending supplies to human settlements through transport tunnels that the Keth had never discovered. Medical facilities that could heal centuries of genetic damage began treating humans who had been broken by generations of slavery. Tom found himself holding a weapon that felt alive, in his hands a rifle that adapted its firing pattern to his intentions, that seemed to know where he wanted to aim before he consciously decided. Around him, other humans were discovering abilities they hadn't known they possessed as the network began activating dormant genetic modifications that had been sleeping in their DNA for 1,000 years. The Keth Empire isn't just losing Earth, Lisa said, studying intelligence reports that were flooding in from across the galaxy. Their slave worlds are in revolt. News of our rebellion is spreading faster than they can suppress it. It was true. The Keth had built their empire on the foundation of absolute dominance, on the belief that no conquered species could ever challenge their technological superiority. But the liberation of Earth was sending shockwaves through every slave world. In their territory, species that had been crushed for millennia were suddenly remembering what freedom looked like. Asterisk. The final battle took place in orbit around Earth, as the last Keth fleet elements tried to regroup for a counterattack. But they were fighting an enemy that had spent 1,000 years preparing for this moment. The Deep Fleet's ships moved through, space-like dancers, their weapon systems so advanced that Keth shields might as well have been made of paper. When the last alien ship was destroyed, a silence fell over Earth that the planet hadn't experienced for 10 centuries. In the ruins of New York, Tom looked up at a sky free of alien vessels for the first time in his life. But Captain Hayes knew this was only the beginning. Through her ship's sensors, she was already detecting Keth reinforcement fleets mobilizing across their empire. The liberation of Earth had been the easy part. Now came the real war. Signal all ships, she commanded. Prepare for deep space operations. We're taking the fight to them. The Keth Empire had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. They were about to learn what humanity had become while they waited in the dark. The Keth High Command had not held an emergency session in over 400 years. Their empire stretched across half the galaxy, a collection of slave worlds and client species that had provided wealth and stability for a dozen generations. Nothing threatened the Keth. Nothing could threaten the KETH. Until Earth went dark, supreme. Commander Kell stood before the assembled War Council, his forearms moving in gestures of barely controlled rage. The blue skin around his black eyes had deepened to an angry purple, and his voice carried harmonics of fury that made the chamber's air itself vibrate. In 6 months, we have lost 47 worlds, he announced to the shocked assembly. 47. Worlds that we have controlled for centuries, now in open revolt. And all because of one primitive backwater planet that should have been crushed to dust a millennium ago. The reports coming in from across the Empire painted a picture that the Keth High Command could barely comprehend. Human ships' vessels, of impossible design and capability, were appearing at slave worlds throughout their territory. But they weren't conquering these planets. They were liberating them. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge of the Defiance as her ship emerged from hyperspace near the mining world of Kepler 442b. The planet had been strip-mined by the Keth for 3 centuries. Its original inhabitants, a species called the Veltar, reduced to a population of barely 1 million survivors working in the deep excavations. Keth defense platforms detecting our approach, reported her tactical officer. They're powering weapons. Hayes smiled with teeth that had been replaced by ceramic composites stronger than steel. Signal the other ships. Time to give the Veltar their planet back. The battle was over in minutes. The Deep Fleet had spent 1,000 years perfecting their technology, while the Keth had grown comfortable and lazy. Human ships phased in and out of normal spacetime, striking with weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. When the Keth defense platforms tried to return fire, they found their targets had already moved to positions that should have been impossible to reach. But the real revolution began when Hayes transmitted a message to the planets. Surface not to the Keth overseers, but to the Veltar slaves working in the mines. The translation protocols in her ship's computer had been updated with linguistic data from 1,000 liberated worlds. People of Kepler 442b. Her voice echoed through every communication system on the planet. This is Captain Hayes of the human Deep Fleet. We were slaves once too. Today, your chains are broken. What followed was not just a military victory, but a psychological earthquake that shook the foundations of the Keth Empire. The Veltar didn't just rebel, they fought with a ferocity that their overseers had never seen before. Slaves who had been beaten down for generations suddenly remembered that they outnumbered their masters 1,000 to 1. On Earth, Tom had become something he never thought possible, a commander in humanity's new fleet. The genetic modifications, awakened by the Prometheus network, had changed him, enhancing his reflexes and mental processing speed to levels that let him interface directly with the advanced human technology. He stood in the command center of a newly constructed battlecruiser, watching as reports came in from across the galaxy. 17 more worlds liberated in the past week, Ben reported. The old man had undergone his own transformation, his failing. Body restored by medical technology that made him appear decades younger while keeping all his accumulated wisdom. The Keth are pulling back their fleets, trying to protect their core worlds. But that was exactly what the Deep Fleet had been hoping for. Captain Hayes had spent 1,000 years studying Keth military doctrine, waiting for them to make this precise mistake. As the alien empire consolidated its forces, it left the outer territories vulnerable to exactly the kind of rapid strike operations that human ships were designed for. The final phase of the war began when the Deep Fleet arrived. At Keth Prime itself, the homeworld of the species that had enslaved half the galaxy. The planet was defended by orbital stations that could have destroyed entire solar systems, protected by shields that had never been breached in the Empire's history. Hayes stood before a holographic display showing the enemy defenses, her enhanced mind processing tactical data at superhuman speeds. Around her, the other ship captains of the Deep Fleet waited for orders. Humans who had been born in the darkness between stars, raised for this single purpose. Signal all liberated worlds, she commanded. Tell them it's time to choose. Stand with us now, and the age of slavery ends forever. Across the galaxy, 1,000 different species looked up at their skies and saw human ships waiting for their answer. The Keth Empire, which had seemed eternal and unbreakable, was about to discover. What happened when you push a species too far? The galaxy trembled and waited for the final battle to begin. End of story.